This episode of the e-commerce playbook is brought to you by Omnisend, the top-rated email and SMS marketing platform for online merchants. Let's be real, email marketing isn't flashy, but that's what makes it great. Who needs chaos when you can have steady, reliable results? That's where Omnisend email and SMS comes in. Brands using it make $73 on average for every dollar spent. It's powerful yet intuitive and does the hard work while you kick back. Plus, their 24/7 support ensures no surprises. Check it out and use code CTC20 to get 20% off for your first month with Omnisend. Seriously, make boring work for you. Hey folks, welcome back to the e-commerce playbook podcast. I'm your host, Richard Gaffin, Director of Digital Product Strategy here at Common Thread Collective. And I'm joined this fine Monday morning by Mr. Taylor Holiday, still in the green earphones, our CEO here at Common Thread. Taylor, what's going on, man?
You know, I'm just excited to talk about what my kids are most concerned about for me, which is, Dad, what are you going to do if you can't watch TikTok anymore? You know?
That's interesting. Your kids aren't concerned, for themselves. They're concerned for you. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they're like, Dad, what are you going to do on your phone if you can't watch TikTok?
There we go. Yeah, so that's what we're talking about today is the impending possible TikTok ban and, of course, its impact on e-commerce. And so I think there's a couple things we want to talk about. First is, of course, the sort of general impact on the industry, but also I think we just want to talk about exactly what's happening. And if you haven't been following the news, give you a sense of exactly what's going on here. So the short story is on Friday, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments over the law that the Biden administration had signed into law. This was a couple years ago, maybe.
It was April of last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. The gist of which being that ByteDance, which is the company that owns TikTok, either has to sell TikTok or it will be banned in the United States. And so, Taylor, let's dig into a little bit more about the specifics of this law and maybe its implications on the 19th, let's say, if in fact TikTok does get banned.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to understand that a law was passed Congress, and it was really actually expansive bipartisan support. There was a cohesive effort, and it's really centered around the idea that this is a national security threat, that because ByteDance is a Chinese company, that ultimately they are at the whim and discretion of the CCP in terms of how and what happens with data, as all Chinese companies are. And so there's no way to ensure the privacy and safety of the information of American consumers on the app, or even access to people's phones. There's all sorts of conspiratorial theories about the ways in which China could be either intentionally making us all dumber by watching brain rot content or eavesdropping into our conversations or whatever it might be. So that's why this is a conversation. Now, what was brought as an appeal that made it to the Supreme Court was the contention that this would impede on the First Amendment rights Americans, that this was a violation of their freedom of speech to take this platform from them. And following the hearing, if you listen to it, I would say that one, the lawyers in both sides were really articulate and thoughtful. And the questions being asked by the Supreme Court judges were also super interesting to go through, but they basically weren't buying it. They were like, look, if this is a national security threat, we don't really care about this idea of an imposition on people's rights. And so there was nothing in that hearing that made it seem as if this appeal was going to be to prevent the ban. And so that was sort of signaled by Polymarket, which is sort of the crystal ball of culture, I guess, these days, or the best opinion about the future is this market where people are using their money to make votes about what they believe will occur, jump from a 30% likelihood that TikTok would be banned before May to it peaked at 83% during the hearing that this was going to occur and it was going to be upheld. And I'll tell you the reason why I agree is because I still believe what the US government wants is divestiture, is that they want a US company to own TikTok and they want TikTok to exist. I think that's in the best American interest, but ByteDance and the CCP has shown no interest in participating in that transaction. And so the ban is really just a negotiating leverage point to force divestiture, is that until ByteDance and the Chinese government see that the US is actually willing to go through this step, they don't believe that they'll be forced to divest. And so really my sense of it is that TikTok is going to disappear forever. Now, unless the Chinese government is really dug in their heels that they're not willing to sell this at all, but that the ban in the United States and the market will be such a financial impact to the platform that will actually force the process of selling it, however long that takes. And whether it's Kevin O'Leary who's going to buy
Yeah,
it or
right.
not, which I don't know if you've seen him out there yelling about it, but
Yeah.
is that this is just a negotiating tactic to force the divestiture so that TikTok can persist.
Right. And so on top of that, not only does it feel likely, given our conversation, that once the ban goes into effect, ByteDance will in fact sell the platform, it's also sort of, I think it's important to point out that on the 19th, the app won't disappear. It'll continue to exist. It may, we actually don't really know much about how the government plans to enforce it, if at all. So that's one kind of factor to it. But also, like, the sort of quote unquote worst case scenario would be that the App Store sort of boots or bans it or whatever. So new users can't download the platform, but all current users will still be on it. So I guess like the sort of scenario of TikTok just vanishing, that's not going to happen on the 19th. But
Well, so I
yeah,
would just say that it's very ambiguous. And even so,
yeah,
Noel Francisco was the lawyer for TikTok in the hearing. And he was even sort of saying, I'm not really sure what happens. Because if you think about the technical enforcement of the idea of a ban, you brought up they could tell Google and Apple that you have to remove them from the App Store, but that doesn't prevent web access. That doesn't
right,
prevent everybody who already has it on their phone from accessing the app. It prevents future updates, which could just create a bunch of like buggy technical issues for users or even security threats to the app from hackers, etc. But the web access would have to come from ISP providers, but there's just like endless amounts of those. So the exact technical enforcement, and then there's obviously this other big sort of, variable in all of this, which is that there's a new president coming in on January
yeah,
20th. And so there's also this perspective that he, being Donald Trump, could just choose to not enforce the law and signal to Apple and Google that it would be fine and they wouldn't be subject to a fine. But then there's this question of whether Apple and Google would believe that and choose to neglect the law. So I think the dynamics of even if the ban occurs, what are the specifics that happen on the other side of that are really ambiguous still for everyone.
This episode of the e-commerce playbook is brought to you by Omnisend, the top-rated email and SMS marketing platform for online merchants. Let's be real, email marketing isn't flashy, but that's what makes it great. Who needs chaos when you can have steady, reliable results? That's where Omnisend email and SMS comes in. Brands using it make $73 on average for every dollar spent. It's powerful yet intuitive and does the hard work while you kick back. Plus, their 24/7 support ensures no surprises. Check it out and use code CTC20 to get 20% off for your first month with Omnisend. Seriously, make boring work for you. Yeah. So let's talk then about, so you tweeted out on the 10th, which was Friday when the Supreme Court hearing happened, sort of 5 effects a potential ban would have on the e-commerce industry. And so let's dig into those a little bit. So obviously for the general user, we're suspecting that the experience may not change that much. But for e-commerce users and for particularly advertising, how do you foresee the effects?
Well, I think what I see is that there's enough risk here that both creators and people with dependencies on the platform are going to begin hedging that reality. And so if I'm a creator and my entire livelihood is predicated on TikTok, I'm sure as heck going to start building out my Instagram account right now. And so I think that's going to be like a natural suppression of the engagement in the channel from both brands and creators generally. But here's what I sort of believe about TikTok. Let's look at it from two perspectives. One, the ad network where you're buying ads on TikTok for the sake of driving transaction to .com for your e-commerce business. And this is going to be a little bit of a bold statement, but I think the elimination of that ad product is actually maybe a net positive. I don't
Mhm.
know anyone who is spending a ton of money on TikTok ads to drive .com revenue in a way that's like, this is a critical function of my acquisition funnel. It would
Yeah.
be a massive loss if it disappeared. I think there's probably a case that in almost every bit of allocation that I saw, I posted that it's about a 4% share of wallet. So it's a lot of money
Mhm.
still that if that went away, everybody might be better off for it. It's
Yeah.
my general perspective. And that's a bit cynical, but I have not seen TikTok be a massively important acquisition funnel for a lot of e-commerce brands.
Yeah. Okay, so then let's talk about the potential benefit towards. So this is the second point you make, that tertiary platforms like Snap, Pins, and AppLovin, in theory, should see benefit, but that's not really how ad dollars flow. So the reduction in share of wallet for TikTok may not necessarily equal an increase for those other platforms.
Yeah, I think at larger enterprise companies, there tend to be much more commonly fixed budgets where there's like a media allocation that has to get spent regardless of whether or not it happens on TikTok or not. But for most D2C brands, that's not how this works. Ad budgets are a function of performance. And
Mm.
so it's not like, well, I was spending $30,000 a month on TikTok, so I'll just take that and put it into Pinterest and spend it no matter what, or
Yeah.
put it into Meta. No, if Meta could absorb 30,000 more dollars positively, you would have already spent it. Like you would have already been pushing the budget in that direction. And
Hmm.
TikTok going away doesn't make Pinterest incremental. TikTok going away doesn't make Snapchat incremental. Um, so there may be some exploratory movement of those budgets. And for enterprise companies, I had some people in the thread saying like, I don't want to lose my budget. I'm going to figure out where to spend it. And so the dynamics are different relative to the size of the organization. But for the most part, in D2C brands, e-commerce brands, budgets are subject to incremental positive impact. And you don't just get to move them without an obligation to create that. TikTok going away doesn't make Pinterest work.
Right. Another way of saying it's not necessarily a zero sum game. It's just wherever the ad dollars make sense is where you want to spend them. So, okay. So your point number 3, I think, is interesting because that feels to me like the real impact of this, which is the effect on agencies. So the idea that like there's so many service providers that are tied to TikTok as a platform, and
Yep.
actually the potential impact to their revenue is much greater than the impact to those to e-commerce brands generally or advertisers or whatever. So let's talk a little bit about what you foresee the impact there being.
Yeah, look, I mean, we had to go through and pull, okay, what is our MRR related to monthly recurring revenue related to the management of TikTok media spend on behalf of our customers? For us, it's not very big, but it is enough that we would feel it and we would need to find some way to try and go out and substitute for that loss. And that is just magnified across businesses whose concentration is more and more on TikTok. And there are entire agencies that exist around TikTok shops. I know Jordan West on Twitter, he like very recently pivoted most of his entire agency to support TikTok shops deployment on behalf of customers. And there are entire agencies that exist to support with TikTok creator affiliates and content on those platforms that, yeah, this is like a very direct threat to their livelihood as a business. That I think there are a whole set of surrounding services and software that exist on top of an ecosystem like that, that if they go away are directly threatened for sure.
Mhm. Okay, so let's you mentioned TikTok shops, so I think that's interesting because it leads right into point 4, which is that $9 billion of GMV from TikTok shops disappears in the U.S. and brand margin dollars are unaffected. Unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, that's me being a smart ass of basically just saying that that money
Yeah.
is not profitable. I think a lot of the TikTok shops revenue that I've seen is subsidized by discounts covered by TikTok or shipping fulfillment, or gets basically whittled down to zero between TikTok's fee, the affiliate creator fees that you're paying, and the marginal result that I just don't, on that $9 billion in GMV, I don't think there's a lot of profit there. Now, there are edge cases. I'm sure Paul at BK Beauty is yelling into the mic right now, talking about how important this channel is to him. And he's right. Like there are brands for who that is not true, that I'm wrong about that. And they are making a lot of profitable dollars there. I mean, Box Ballin has to be making money with how many ads I see from them on TikTok. I'm trying to think of some of the other like TikTok specific products that are just like everywhere. So there's definitely people for whom it's beneficial, and that's going to come at a dramatic impact and to change their business. But it's also so novel that I can't imagine that there aren't other channels that surround those businesses. But for a certain amount of customers, that $9 billion in GMV is going to be really a substantial loss to
Yeah.
their business that it's worth acknowledging for sure.
Yeah. Well, so I feel like that kind of like it seems like a little bit of an undercurrent to maybe both like number 1 and number 4 here on this list and in the thread in general, that like TikTok as a channel for ecom generally is actually maybe not that valuable. And so the impact here is sort of maybe not negligible, but on the whole, like this just doesn't make that much of a difference.
I
That's fair.
genuinely believe that I think TikTok could disappear and the e-commerce industry would absorb that loss so fast that it would be entirely inconsequential.
Yeah.
I really think that. Again, that's not true for every business. I'm speaking in generalities there. For the industry as a whole, I think the attention, the media dollars all get absorbed into the other social platforms so quickly that we wouldn't even notice TikTok's gone. Even when my kids ask me like, "Dad, are you like gonna be sad when TikTok goes away?" I'm like, "No, like all of that content exists in basically the same form factor in so many other places that I'll just go watch IG Reels. I'll just go watch YouTube Shorts. I'll just read more Twitter." Like it just won't be something that actually causes like I'm gonna spend less time on my phone. I think it's just not I don't,
Yeah.
it didn't exist before and I looked at my phone all day. So I
Yeah.
think it's a pretty easy absorption of content.
Yeah. And that segues perfectly into your last point, which is around increases to like IG Reels inventory in the short term. Maybe talk a little bit about the opportunity there.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one that's sort of challenging to figure out. A couple of data points. So right now, in terms of short form video content consumption by time, IG Reels is third. It's behind TikTok and YouTube Shorts. And so I think that if you assume some of that time, and I put in that thread, what is it, like 50 minutes a day is the average user time spent on TikTok?
Yeah. An hour.
Um,
About. Yeah.
an hour, yeah. So if you just assume that again, like I don't think people suddenly take that hour and go back out and walk more or something. We just assume that that gets absorbed into the phone
Yeah.
in some other form factor. Then I think there are beneficiaries to the most specific content format that matches that same consumption pattern, which I think our YouTube Shorts and IG Reels are the most obvious ones. I think Twitter and X are going to try and play in that space, and they're doing a little bit more around it. But I still don't see video as the primary medium there. That you're going to get some of that time consumption into IG Reels, which in theory equals more ad inventory. That I think there's a question always of, does that increased supply lead to better outcomes at cheaper prices, or does the price get artificially inflated by Meta's algorithm for their own monetary benefit? And then that answer is like sort of anybody's pontificating on that because it's not like a pure and honest marketplace such that if the supply increased, the price would therefore decrease. Like Meta can put their thumb on that scale. Like they can control that. So I don't imagine that they're just going to allow the CPM to drop and everybody arbitrage it. And even if it does, what happens in this marketplace is that it's so perfectly capitalistic that people will just increase their spend until the price gets modified again. Right now, that may lead to some more volume for some people in the short term if they have really good content on IG Reels. I think that's possible. But for a period, there could be a little bit of an arbitrage there. I think there's not that many brands that are actually set up to effectively take advantage of YouTube Shorts right now and YouTube as an ad product.
Mhm.
Interesting note that I won't share the source of this yet, but I know that YouTube has a creator content platform that's actually not too dissimilar from some of the stuff that's available on TikTok, but that the reps aren't incentivized to sell it. And so its adoption is really low. So I think you could see some energy start to pick up around that and go from there.
Nice. Cool. Well, I mean, I think that kind of covers our bases here. I mean, is there any, if anything, what's the takeaway from this?
I just think that if I'm a brand right now, um, if there is any part of my business that feels like TikTok's an imperative, I'm hedging it. I've got to create. I think that is the best indication that we have. Polymarket today is sitting at 73%. Yes, that it will be banned. And so I'm going to hedge that. And then agencies, if you provide services here, get out in front of this. Have conversations with your customers. Let them know that you're aware. Here's what we're going to do in the event that that happens. Here's where we could either reallocate those dollars and you could make suggestions. I would check out YouTube and the creator platforms there. And then keep an eye out on IG Reels in the event that that happens. And let's watch the user behavior emerge to see what we can learn from that dynamic. And of course, we'll see an inauguration day and all the rhetoric that comes from the new president and how that affects this as well. But we live in a very dynamic market. This is just another indication of that and why we have to be prepared to shift and pivot at all times.
That's right, folks. All right. Well, I think that'll do it for us for this week. Appreciate y'all listening, and we'll talk to you again next week. Yeah.